Thank you for joining us for this Mediterranean Cafe, and thanks for the young BSF participants for making it to their last event of the forum. Before we start with the World Cafe, we have 3 introductory speeches, and I would firstly like to kindly invite Mr. Istok Mirošić, State Secretary of the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please.
Thank you, good morning to all of you here in Bled. It's a nice sunny day, and let's hope it will stay and guide us through complicated international relations, at least with some sunshine. As I said, I would like to welcome you in Bled at this 13th Bled Strategic Forum and its young part, which you will address the role of youth in bridging the divide. I'm extremely glad that today's panel is organized together with our close friend and neighbor, with whom we developed really excellent bilateral relations, and it is also this year chairman in office of the OSCE, and this is Italy here. This is important not only because we share the same interests and concerns in the Mediterranean region, but also because we both, Italy and Slovenia, believe that young leaders could importantly contribute to future political processes to make our planet, let's say, safer and better place. You, young people, are one of the most susceptible groups when it comes to radicalisation that leads to extremism. Therefore, we need to look for positive alternatives for youth, especially through education and jobs, and through their or your active involvement into political processes. The young people could be drivers of positive transformation of societies. I hope that today's discussion will showcase successful examples of prevention and de-radicalization, and will highlight positive stories of youth engagement in the spirit of drawing lessons learned and exchanging best practices between the OSCE participating states and the Mediterranean partners for cooperation. Security in Mediterranean was also incorporated in the program of the recent Slovenian chairmanship to OSCE, Forum for Security Cooperation, FSC, at the joint meeting of the Forum for Security Cooperation and the Permanent Council devoted to this topic. One of the panelists, it was Dr. Assia Benchalah Haloui, Ambassador at Large of the Kingdom of Morocco, while drawing from the lessons learned from events and conflicts taking place in the southern Mediterranean, emphasized that the valid base for durable security lies in the need to give real stakes in society to the youth. I would like also to mention the Slovenian initiative focused on the countries of Western Balkans, named Positive Agenda for Youth in the Western Balkans. This agenda offers positive alternatives for the young through existing programs of education, educational mobility, vocational training, people-to-people contacts, and others. And here I would like to emphasize the potential of the OSCE field missions, as they can significantly add value with their help in supporting the regional coordination and cooperation. In addition, Slovenia was pleased that Positive Agenda for Youth initiative used in the Western Balkans has been included in the Union for Mediterranean roadmap of 2017, and as a transfer of experiences and best practices from the Western Balkans to the Mediterranean. Furthermore, I would like to point out the positive example of the Slovenia-based Euro-Mediterranean University called EMUNI, which covers themes and areas which are really significant for the Euro-Mediterranean area and are also part of the Union for Mediterranean roadmap. We believe that awareness rising of young people about all forms of intolerance and discrimination gives a valuable contribution towards a more tolerant society. Embracing diversity, ensuring equality, and promoting and safeguarding human rights of each individual are the most powerful tools we possess to effectively fight this. Dear friends, another challenge currently facing the OSCE, EU and Mediterranean region are migrations. Youth is the population group widely affected by this trend, be it north or south of the Mediterranean, and the use of the modern technologies, social networks, much contributes to this phenomenon, especially among young. We believe that OSCE and its partners for cooperation through political dialogue and practical cooperation can jointly contribute to addressing the issue of migration and its root causes through the OSCE cross-dimensional approach, which was already affirmed in the OSCE Ministerial Council decision on migration in Ljubljana in 2005 during the Slovenian OSCE Chairmanship. I trust that today's discussion will tackle challenges as well as opportunities of migration across the Mediterranean region. Slovenia has a good practice to share in this area as well. In order to raise awareness about the rights of migrants and refugees with a view to foster atmosphere of tolerance, the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs developed a simple teaching tool, a worksheet entitled Children Refugees, intended for pupils in the Slovenian educational system. By applying the tool in schools, about 40,000 Slovenian youngsters had a chance to think and talk about what migrant and refugee children go through, what challenges they face, and what rights they have in the difficult situation they found themselves in. Dear friends, last but not least, I would like to focus on gender equality. This issue is of special importance to Slovenia, and I am very pleased to know that this year's Italian OSCE presidency continues to promote it. In Slovenia, we strongly believe in the importance of empowering women to contribute fully to conflict prevention, crisis management, conflict resolution, and peace-building efforts. Women, together with children, are also particularly endangered by the migrant smuggling and trafficking of human beings. However, women also have powerful influence in the process of de-radicalisation and reintegration. Involving women on an equal footing improves situational awarenesses and increase operational effectiveness. This was emphasized also during the above-mentioned joint meeting of the Forum for Security Cooperation and the Permanent Council, where the practical examples of women leading peace efforts in Libya were highlighted. This topic must therefore remain an OSCE priority in the knowledge that security is inextricably linked to gender equality. Another issue where the OSCE has played an important role is mediation. In the last year, Slovenia focused on promoting mediation in the Mediterranean region, also through mediation in Mediterranean, so-called MedMed initiative, and in the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network established by Italy in 2017, in particular highlighting indispensable role that women and young people can play in the peace and reconciliation processes. Practice of peaceful conflict resolution, mediation, and dialogue is something that is yet to be fully integrated in our society, also through educational system. One good example how to achieve this goal is project of school and peer mediation that Slovenia started in August last year in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Promotion of culture of dialogue, in particular among young people, is an important way of establishing inter-ethnic and intercultural tolerance, thus contributing to building of lasting and sustainable peace and post-conflict areas through the education. Ladies and gentlemen, or better to say, dear friends, today's event is about listening to youth's voices, your voices, and understanding how we can all engage better in the future. Youth represents present and the future of our societies, and thus needs the continued attention of policymakers, which should devote much more attention to what the youth has to say. We all have problems in the European Union and outside, especially in the countries in the Western Balkans, by massively leaving youth to other countries. So these countries are basically become more and more empty because youth would like to see better and more normal living conditions in other countries. We believe so that empowering the youth is key element in countering radicalization and violent extremism and in addressing the root causes of migration trends. Therefore, investing in the youth, in you, on both sides of the Mediterranean, ours and yours, or north and south, offering them positive alternatives and enhancing their opportunities in both economic and political spheres, should be in the center of efforts of the OSCE and its Mediterranean partners for cooperation. By saying this, I wish you best and every success in your work and a very, very pleasant stay in Slovenia, in Bled. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mirošić. Next on the floor, I would kindly like to invite Mr. Matjaž Nemec, who is the chair of the Committee on Foreign Policy at the Slovenian National Assembly. Please.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, I'm particularly happy to be here today and extended the greetings of the President of the National Assembly of the Republic of Slovenia to the distinguished participants of this panel. I'm also very pleased that the Embassy of the Italian Republic put forth the idea of this gathering and the framework of the Italian chairship of the OSCE, and that the Center of the European Perspective was able to include it in the ambitious program of this year's Bled Strategic Forum. The Euro-Mediterranean region is heterogeneous in many aspects. If on the one hand, we see increasing the cultural and the human bonds between our societies, we experience new tensions and are heavily divided by old and new rifts on the other. The challenges affecting the Mediterranean region are linked to the security of the OSCE area and call for cooperative solutions, as they cannot be effectively tackled by any single country alone. Therefore, we need to step up and engagement in the context of the OSCE Mediterranean cooperation. It's also essential to discuss how to make better use of the OSCE Mediterranean Partnership as a forum for dialogue, decreasing tensions and promoting cooperation. The current situation requires joint efforts and joint action by various players. All true statistics show that the young are the largest and the fastest expanding demographic group in the region, and their role in establishing new political patterns, consolidating economics, expanding new social models, and fostering cultural process is underestimated or even neglected. Young population still suffers from a lack of empowerment in many sectors and experiences exclusion from the decision-making process. If youngsters also are faced with the lack of security and stability and have the predominant feeling that they live on the margins of society with no voice of power, this will sooner or later erupt in different processes, from political instability to economics or economic crisis, from ethnic or religious tensions to migration. The young, on the other part, should ask for more environment, involve themselves in decision-making activities, develop skills and speak out for their rights, demanding laws and programs that promote their role in the society. Occasions and opportunities such as this one today, gathering young people and involving them in a discussion with the aim of detecting common problems and addressing them in the search of the mutually acceptable solution, can be good source of pressure and on the governments to further develop strategies and plans at international, region and local levels. The problems we share generate new the interdependencies between Europe and Mediterranean partners, facing both to think about how to join efforts to achieve common security and bridge the development gap that still divides Europe from our southern neighbors. A positive agenda of Mediterranean cooperation should not exclude the young generation. To overcome existing challenges, we must listen to the experiences and perspectives of young representatives and leaders who are only yet entering the stage, but who will shape the future of our society over the coming decades. The participants, I'm very much look forward to hearing the outcomes of today's World Cafe and finding inspiration in your thoughts, visions, and ideas that we, participants, could implement. I would like to thank once again the organizer for the valuable work and of full support of the 2018 Italian OSCE Chairmanship. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And for the third person who's going to deliver the opening speech, it was actually the man behind the idea. Approached me with the thought of, let's do something together, and I was super excited about it. I would kindly like to invite Ambassador Paolo Tricchilo, the Italian ambassador in the Republic of Slovenia, to deliver the opening speech.
State Secretary Mirosic, Honorable Nemets, dear Mediterranean Cafe leaders, Professor El Zoheiri, Dr. Fenko, Mr. Sal, my compatriots, Dr. Greco, Vice President of Italian Institute for International Affairs, Mr. Pugliese, Special Representative of the Chairperson in Office on Youth and Security, dear Moderator, Melika Mucherina, and Center for European Perspectives, dear participants. I am very pleased that in the framework of the Italian presidency of the OSCE, the Young Blood Strategic Forum is hosting this important event to discuss about the Mediterranean dimension of the OSCE, an element that has always been present ever since the Helsinki Final Act of 1975, with a particular focus on youth and security. In my intervention, I would like to draw from the recent statement of the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, His Excellency Enzo Moavero Milanesi, in the OSCE Permanent Council that was held in Vienna a few days ago on the 30th of August. On that occasion, he underlined that the Mediterranean, the sea that unites the three continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe, has become an extremely sensitive area, crossed by migration flows originated in particular from sub-Saharan Africa. These are dramatic flows, sometimes ending in tragedies, some of them more visible, especially at sea, some others less so, in particular when they happen in desert areas. They concern people that are looking for a better future or escaping from wars or oppressive regimes. This is an issue of common responsibility, including for non-Mediterranean countries, that must be genuinely shared to the maximum extent possible without nationalistic reserves, since the Mediterranean represents one of the great global challenges. Mr. Moavero Milanesi has furthermore noted that the so-called migration phenomenon must also be understood as human trafficking and neo-slavery exploitation of human beings. Therefore, we must not close our eyes and turn our heads the other way, but we must stand and act together. On this point, I have read also a very interesting interview by the Afghanistan president, and it was very much along the same lines about the human trafficking and the need to stop it. We must actually contrast hatred among nations and peoples on a religious and ethnic basis, as well as on misunderstood historical and ancestral basis. On the 22nd of October, we will host in Rome the OSCE Conference on Combating Intolerance and Discrimination on Religious Grounds towards a comprehensive response in the OSCE region, dedicated to the fight against every form of intolerance and discrimination, aiming also to stop human traffickers and violence on human beings seeking a better life away from difficult situations. At the same time, we must also intervene to ameliorate the social and economic conditions in places of origin. The European continent has been for centuries a continent from where people would migrate elsewhere. Today it has become a place where people migrate to, so we cannot forget what we have been in the past. And we must intervene through cooperation and development actions in favor of growth and improved socio-economic conditions in the origin countries of migration, taking into particular account the added value represented by youth. This is why our debate in Bled today is so important, in the presence and with the active and welcome contribution of youth that represent our true hope for a better world to live in, be it in Europe, in Asia, or in Africa. Let me just conclude with the logistical note. You are all kindly invited to the lunch that is offered by the Italian embassy at the end of this debate. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much to all three opening speeches. Now the fun part starts. Let me just shortly describe how World Cafe functions for those of you not familiar with the concept. You have randomly chosen the seat of your table. All the tables are led by our 5 moderators. I will read their names and the topic that's going to be discussed. We are going to be discussing in an informal format for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, you have a chance to change the table. So you can go to another table to discuss second topic. So we will do 3 rounds of 20 minutes. After 1 hour, all the table moderators will join me on the panel, where they will shortly describe what was discussed behind their table in a couple of minutes. Then we open the floor for the questions. So I will just shortly introduce the table moderators. Dr. Abdelhamid Al-Zohairi from Emuni University will be discussing about higher education and youth employability. We have Dr. Ana Bujinović-Fenko from University of Ljubljana, discussing youth understanding of their power in the Mediterranean partner states and in Europe. We have Mr. Matteo Pugliese from OSCE, discussing the synergies to foster the role of youth in the OSCE Mediterranean Partnership for Cooperation. We have Mr. Fabian Sal from Frontex, discussing irregular migration as a prevailing security challenge in the Mediterranean. What's the role of youth? And Professor Ettore Grechi from Istituto Affari Internazionali, discussing new migration strategy for Europe. 20 minutes, we'll be keeping the time. After 20 minutes, you're able to switch the table according to the topic you most prefer. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining me at the podium. I'm sorry for the time constraint. I understand the topics were really interesting and you could debate it all day long, but I sincerely hope our table moderators will stay with us for the duration of BSF so you can approach them later on as well.
At 8, so it's at 8.
Not everyone got the opportunity to listen all of the topics, so I would just kindly like to ask the table moderators to present us what was the key point or the main takeaway from those 3 rounds of discussions that you have. Really shortly, because I want to open the floor for questions as well. We could just go in order. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was on our table, we were debating the higher education institutions and the role of education in security, particularly for youth. And we started by debating first what does security mean to different peoples coming from different backgrounds and different geographic or educational backgrounds. And as expected, security would mean differently, whether it's economic security, environmental security, peace in its conventional meaning, or other forms of security. So at the end, we deduced that security is an ecosystem and should not be regarded as one aspect only. The second issue to be debated was the role of education, particularly when we're talking about whether it's formal education, like in higher education institutions, or informal education, like how to be a global citizen or an intercultural citizen, because this also has an effect on security. The areas which we spoke about at length were what needs to be the transformation that is needed inside the higher education institutions to enhance employability of the graduates, and new areas to be introduced, or kind of new teaching methodologies like critical thinking, debating, and other practical exercises. Also, it was mentioned that security should be integrated in the curricula, but not as a standalone topic, but rather the aspects of security should be cross-cutting in the whole curriculum. There's also need to transform the professors to employ these newer technologies or newer, let's say, teaching methodologies. So professors should also undergo, not only students, but professors should undergo lifelong and professional learning. I don't want to take much time, but it was a very rich discussion. We also talked about intercultural dialogue and how mobilities and intercultural understanding, tolerance can be enhanced through integrating this in the curriculum. And we talked about open access, educational counseling, because students mentioned that at the time when they are entering higher education institutions, they lack the knowledge and experience on which topic or which discipline they should choose. So educational counseling is one area. Connecting universities with the business sector and having structured internships, connecting universities together, also forming networks. I mean, all these were areas that were discussed to transform the higher education institutions to keep up with the pace of the changing job market and to adapt to a new world order.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you again, media and the organizers, and for the kind invitation. And my group, we try to, well, since I'm representing the Italian chairmanship of OSCE when it comes to youth and security, I wanted to focus the discussion on the role of youth in the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250 and 2419 of this year, with the OSCE partners in the Mediterranean, so basically from Northern Africa. What we try to discuss is not just the role of youth on migration, but how we could implement these resolutions which are entailed in our in the mandate of my colleagues and I in the OSCE. So basically, which pathways we should follow in this regard when it comes to the participation of youth networks or single young individuals in decision-making processes with the Mediterranean partners of the OSCE, because in many cases the processes and the situation, the political situation, is not the same as in the OSCE participating states. So in this regard, one of the main tools I think we should consider is the United Nations Progress Study, which was published this year, and it was followed by the adoption of the new United Nations Security Council Resolution 2419 on youth, peace, and security. But from the discussion we had in the three groups, what I would like to highlight is, first of all, that we should first try to understand and be aware about what the civil society is in each of these countries, because sometimes it's not the same that we are used to work with in our own countries, and also try to maybe leave the mentality of working just with NGOs and with structures, but also try to empower the single young individuals in those countries, which is maybe much easier in some political situations. Maybe we can follow this discussion later.
Yes, thank you very much. My roundtable was on migration in the Mediterranean area, and I started off by presenting some views on how possibly migration does affect Mediterranean security, starting with EU to NATO cohesion, but going as far as, of course, tying down military assets to to effectively also the human security dimension, because we shall not forget the humanitarian tragedy that's at the very core of this issue. I was more or less surprised to see that I heard, to quote, that youth does not have a common approach and perspective on migration. I was always under the impression that maybe youth was a little more liberal and maybe more pro-migration, but of course we had a diverse range of participants, and it certainly became clear that there's no sort of common angle when it comes to this. Something I very much enjoyed in the discussion is the call for differentiating between those who have a actual right to asylum, those who are, according to the Convention on Refugees, who have a right to international protection, to differentiate those against, for instance, economic migrants who more or less seek to come for better opportunities, but in that picture maybe not, shouldn't necessarily have a right to stay to the benefit of those who have a legitimate right to international protection. There was one thing that was actually quite unifying was a view that we should have more and better efforts on returning those who do not have that right to stay. There was, for instance, ideas on how youth could also help on providing maybe a better opportunity once migrants get returned. And then also on root causes of migration, one idea which I very much liked was, given how youth is obviously the tech-savvy sort of generation, couldn't, for instance, young people connect with people in countries of origin and tell them about the reality that they face in Europe? Because, in effect, it's not that great maybe for everybody who comes. It's not what was promised by people smugglers. And two, because if I'm telling somebody my age, I'm still quite young, I hope. So if I'm telling somebody my age, look, it's not going to be, you're not going to have a nice house and everything is going to be offered to you once you arrive. Maybe that is actually a more powerful message. And then finally, just one more is root causes. Holding leaders accountable is something very much connected to youth empowerment, and better governance, of course, in the end of the day, is the way for more stability in some of the regions that much of migration is coming from.
Thank you.
This one, I think.
Thank you. So I actually will start with a finding of the previous report, and that is that the youth political state points are actually fragmented. This was one of the findings in our final round, and they are not surprising at all to me, people were not surprised at the table, but maybe that's because the initial question that I started in the first round was a thesis that youth is not a homogeneous group which would immediately have a pre-defined political standpoint, a certain commonality. This was a thesis that we started, and what we did is we tried to find elements of who youth is, or what does a young person do, and how do we define youth. And basically the idea was just to see whether there are some sort of interregional, so something that is common to youth in Europe and in Mediterranean, and what is different to youth in the two regions. Okay, this was the purpose. So we acknowledged 7 commonalities, something that was, let's say, globally or interregionally in common, and 3 differences. Obviously, the commonalities are prevailing importance of economic, social status of the family. Then education, so generally in any society, somebody who is in education process still would be determined as young. Very important factor is whether they are from urban or rural area. Very importantly, they're looking for a job, so they are still to enter a job market. This was a strong commonality. Then it was exposed that youth are seen as the agent of social change. And together with this, digitalization was a little bit exposed as a sort of enhancer of communication and potential driver or enabler of social change. The sixth factor is being affected by and potentially awareness raising of climate change. So this would be something new, or youth would be exposed more to than, let's say, elderly. And finally, the globalization effect. So this is obviously common to all generations. This was a little bit disputed, but the idea here was to show that when you are born into a culture, you are still to acknowledge what this culture means. But if there is multiple presence of various cultures or globalization, you are in sort of a in between, or what it was said, search of either identity or national identity or political identity a bit longer, or you have multiple identities. Yeah. So this was exposed as commonalities for European and Mediterranean youth. As a difference, a big difference is obviously the length of education, because in Europe usually it lasts longer, more people go to tertiary level of education, and they enter job market later. Obviously, getting a job is a big difference, the age when you get a job. So somebody aged 35 is young person or youth in Europe, but they might already be working for 10, 12 years in the Mediterranean countries. They would have a household. They would be married. This is also something that people at the table exposed as a big difference, right? So it's not just age, it's multitude of factors. Mobility, I think this is really important and resonates through other tables. So more opportunities for mobility in the north and less in the Mediterranean countries, maybe within city mobility, or at best intrastate mobility is what the Mediterranean youth is exposed to, whereas in Europe, not only Erasmus schemes, but just general economic opportunities would be higher to travel, even for tourist purposes, not just education. To briefly conclude what this brings about, we were thinking about what enhances or threatens youth participation in politics due to this definition of commonalities or differences of youth. And we saw that obviously education is a very important factor. Formal education was exposed, where all the previous factors were already exposed. Conflict or war was added. Prevents education obviously very much, or pushes people to get political standpoints earlier than it would be proper or naturally relevant through their social experience. And finally, we concluded that not just formal education, but informal education is really important for youth to enter public sphere. So either through NGOs, voluntary practices, or youth political parties, or civic engagement. This is what is relevant. I repeat, we were all in consensus that youth is harder to get a common ground on a political standpoint than it used to be. 1968 demonstrations were mentioned as a sort of a common ground for sort of global youth at the time, and nowadays it's very hard to imagine that you would have global youth around the world, or even in a limited interregional context, striving for something to gain social and political power against the establishment, right? So this is how we concluded. But with reaching that, right, it's not to look for uniform patterns. Some wise voices were raised in terms that to look for political participation, you still have to take into consideration traditions, political culture, and social culture, social patterns within a country, right? Who participates, who can enter public space, at what age, gender issues, and so on. Okay, Thank you.
Many thanks. And we also, our subject was also migration. Perhaps we discussed the subject from a broader perspective than in the third roundtable. And I think this debate was very stimulating, a lovely debate. And we have concentrated mostly on four questions, very general question. Whether in the current circumstances we can still see migration as an opportunity, or the prevailing view, especially in some countries, that it is instead a challenge, should be accepted or not. So I ask the participants to express their views on this very general topic, and particularly to present what they think is the attitudes of the public opinion in their countries on this point. And second, of course, we know very well that there are deep divergences, different views in Europe about this phenomenon. And second question related to the root causes, the main factors behind this divergence, whether they have to do more with the specific situations of the individual countries or within them. If, for instance, as it seems to be the case, different sectors of society tend to see this phenomenon in different ways, and particularly as we can witness, the most disadvantaged and poorest sector of society are more inclined to ask for the adoption of tougher measures against migration. The third main point was if at what extent we will be able to reconcile the widely perceived need for a stronger and more effective border control with our obligation in due to international law to assist people in danger, to host them and to integrate in our society. I think this is a thorny dilemma we're facing. And second, the final point, perhaps one most political, sensitive and important question is if the EU will be able in the near term, also in the longer term, to become a more effective and a more effective actor in this field by acquiring new instruments as has been proposed by some of its institutions, including the European Commission and European Parliament. I would say that there has been a strong emphasis, this was a very interesting point, on the specific individual characteristic of the European countries, and contrary to my expectation, many underline this element that in effect, if a country is internally homogeneous, if it has had experiences or has been exposed to other cultures, this is particularly important, but also the political factor is relevant. If a country has acquired very recently independence, on the factor independence, is certainly much less inclined to accept an open policy on migration. And this is a factor that many participants have underlined. So the level of exposure and also ethnic homogeneity of the country, the experience that the individual countries has had so far with different cultures and people of different ethnic origin. But the second point concerning the perceptions prevailing in Europe, which was very much emphasized, was the role of media, and in particular the prevailing narrative in some countries. Many have argued that, in fact, if we see the numbers, in some cases the numbers are quite low, even in countries like Slovenia, where the numbers are indeed low, and in case of countries which are mostly transit country, there is a strong narrative and on the negative impact of migration and the capacity of some parties or political leaders to amplify the existing prejudices and misperceptions. Concerning the role of the European Union, last point, I would just say that some quite interesting ideas were put forward. One I would like to mention is the fact that the European Union should try to help foster, to promote individual country system of training and education that can help migrants to integrate. And the idea behind this proposal is essentially that we are lacking a system that can help the migrants to be integrated in our labor system, and practically that we are missing some opportunities in these regards. This applies, of course, to some countries more than others. The second point is cooperation in sharing data information, but also political judicial information. Of course, this has been an important factor, in particularly in the relations between EU and some Balkan countries. And in this regard, there was also an emphasis on the regional partnership. Regional partnership should be considered an integral part of European strategy on migration, because without this type of cooperation, it would be extremely difficult, as happened in recent time, to manage effectively new possible potential flows of migrants. Fourth point, there was, of course, also several interventions mentioning the need to have a so-called holistic approach, and in particular to have active policy towards their countries, the country of origin and transit, although there were different views how much assistance and aid to those countries may actually contribute, especially in the shorter term, to manage this phenomenon. There was perhaps little discussion on the specific proposals to enhance the EU role, but the general argument which was made is that indeed to make those proposals advance in face of the existing very evident opposition from various countries, there is first the need to come to a common understanding in Europe on this phenomenon, and the need to have a common system. So this is the problem, I would add, that is central to the current struggle concerning the future of the European Union, whether we are prepared at the level of individual countries to transfer other further responsibilities and powers to the European Union, because there is, of course, a clear contradiction between the request for greater solidarity, which came from many quarters and countries, and this continued reluctance to accept a stronger role of the European Union.
Thank you so much. Briefly, I would collect one or two questions from the audience, since we have slight time constraints before the opening of the main event. We have 2 microphones around, so maybe 1 to 2 questions collected, and then the panelists can briefly respond. Do we have any questions? Yeah, over here.
Thank you. My name is Aida. I'm from Slovenia, but currently working in Brussels for the European Commission for Directorate of Education and Culture. So I will direct my 2 comments mainly to the last 2 speakers. I was involved in Anna's panel just at the end, but due to the time constraint, I think there was a little point that maybe is missing from all of this, and it's actually the global youth that you mentioned, that maybe your thesis was that it lacks somehow. I think there's a paradox in this, because if we follow the conference, the youth conferences mainly, from the last 3-4 years, they have been addressing young people as the future, as the actors of change, but really as someone who will change the world. I think all in all, everywhere, we can see and hear slogans of "you are the change," right? So I think there's a bit of a social pressure as well on young people to also address not just, their local issues, but somehow to feel the responsibility of addressing radicalisation, of addressing a refugee crisis, which is always reflected as such, tackling climate change. So there's somehow this paradox of claiming that young people are passive actors of society, but at the same time, they are the change and the future. So there's somewhere in between where the bridge has to be made, maybe. And of course, there's a lot of unseen things. We mentioned the 68 revolutions or movement, but I think that now there's so many NGOs, but local organizations and young groups, just communities that tackle their own issues that are a lot of times unseen because of the number of them. And then to the last speaker, I was very pleased to hear the need to somehow promote the EU's role into tackling this, and not just migration, but in connection with the cross-cultural awareness, right? And especially if we see it in the context of youth, I think, again, there's a lot of unseen things on the ground, but also from the perspective of the EU, since if I mention a few, there's the Erasmus Plus online exchanges. Maybe they're not known to a lot of people, but 200,000 young people have been already present, and the project is ongoing until 2019 to actually get involved in online discussions that are always moderated by cultural mediators, and they bring together young people from Europe, so EU member states, and Arab and African countries to debate and tackle some relevant topics to them. Apart from that, we have also the youth ambassadors, and so a lot of things that also the EU is investing in, but maybe are left unseen.
Thank you very much, Grazia. Any other comments? One more behind, and I think we'll conclude with the questions.
Thank you. My name is Chimwe Okebe, Embassy of Nigeria, Bucharest, Romania, but with concurrent accreditation to Slovenia and Bulgaria. Now, looking at the topic that we examined, or that was unpacked by the 5 coordinators, the question that may sweep across one's mind is, what are the tools within the 21st century security environment open to the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe to deal with the spectrum of challenges, that affects it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would say 2 minutes for responses from whoever wishes. Thank you.
Just go ahead.
No. Just first brief remarks on the role of youth. Of course, everybody perhaps agrees that the youth has a special role to play because they can actually be effective bridge builder and driving force behind cooperation programs. And but we should be careful in understanding that there are, of course, different situations. The youth can be in different situations, and particularly we are still facing a situation where huge portions of young people remain in difficult economic situation. They are unemployed. So we should not limit ourselves to think only about those that we are able to involve in those programs that are endorsed by the European Union, promoted by the European Union. So it's extremely important that this sentiment we witness in our countries of frustration and discontent among the youth is fought. This can be done only through specific social and economic programs. The second point is, of course, that this this role of the youth is developed mostly or in many situations through NGOs, and the role of the NGOs is particularly important since they are in some countries under threat, and their role is being eroded. That's another point it's important in my view to stress. Let me just add that we as an institute have promoted a specific program called New Med, which is aimed at promoting and fostering the Mediterranean dimension of the OSCE. And within this project, we have a special program on the youth. So I think the OSCE can be an effective role to play, because this is just part of a much wider program undertaken by the OSCE many years ago, and which is developing. So, of course, the EU will remain in this regard the main factor, but there are other institutions, including the OSCE, including towards the Mediterranean countries, that have a role to play.
Since I was challenged, although I don't think I have a smart or some sort of good answer, but you know, if you're going to a youth global conference, of course you have good intentions as a young person who represents interests or what you think interests of youth are, but you're already a mainstream politician. Take it this way or another, any good intention you might have, you're already the mainstream. In the political process, I'm saying, not in terms of your standpoint. But secondly, I think fragmentation that we've heard of today is everywhere in society, and youth is more or less, I don't know, but it's susceptible to fragmentation as well. So where does the youth get information? It used to be from parents, from official religion that they were part of, or school, and that was it, right? Then university students would read newspapers and watch TV for news, for information program. And that was the source of information. Where does youth get information nowadays? I don't know if high school children or pupils read newspapers or if they are engaged in getting balanced information about political processes in their local community, national community, or internationally. They read what they get on their news feed, on their social medium, or whatever, where they are. So it's not a critique to them, because this is a societal feature. Digitalization enables, but then it also, you have to use it smartly as a tool for a purpose you have. So I think that Global Youth Conference, the paradox you said, yeah, of course it helps, it's necessary. You cannot do without it, but it will not, by effect, reach a lot of young people. What we try to do in the panel is identify which segments of youth you have to address as a common group globally, and which are nationally or locally particular. So in this sense, youth is just as much similar to any other generation, right? Unless you have a, global, company or somebody that will be offering jobs just like that anywhere around the world, and they will all vote for that one. It's senseless to go this way. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Anna. Fabian, you want to add something?
Sure. I think the first question was directed to my colleagues here, and I think the second more to the left of me, but I will say, at least from the Frontex or the European Union perspective, the OSCE is much more of a platform for dialogue. I'm looking forward to hear exactly, practically, what the tools are. But coming to the EU response and to the Commission, I would like to say on Wednesday we will have the Commission present its plans for Frontex 3.0. It will, of course, I'm not at liberty to discuss, but it will be a major change in terms of migration management for Europe.
Yeah, trying to connect to what you just said. I mean, the OSCE, of course, is an organization, is a platform that works in a total different way from other international and regional organizations such as the UN. But I think that we should take advantage of this difference when it comes to enhancing the role of youth in the political decision-making processes and so on. But for instance, regarding Mediterranean, last year we had this conference organized by the OSCE in Malaga, Spain, which gathered young participants from youth networks in Europe and elsewhere, and elaborated this so-called Malaga Decalogue, 10 recommendations to the OSCE participating states about the role of youth in this. And I think this could be also the opportunity for the Italian chairmanship to try to implement and propose this recommendation, not just to the participating states, but a way to encourage the Mediterranean partners to implement these in their own countries. Thanks.
Very quickly, maybe responding to the comment of the passive active agents of change, the youth, and commenting on what Anna said, and I believe very much that social media are playing a very destructive, and I'm using this word intentionally, which is a strong word, destructive role now in polarizing the whole society and particularly youth. And I'll give you one good example. In the 2011 Arab Spring in Egypt, it was the Facebook that made all these young people go down to Tahrir Square and demand change. And this was, at that time when it was happening, it was quite a very positive, inspiring moment, I have to say, that collected the youth, which we were all saying that they are very passive and they don't respond to the challenges that they see, and they don't rise up to demand a better future for themselves. And Facebook was the tool that brought them all to Tahrir Square. But once this ended, Facebook itself was the tool that polarized these youth and made them all work in smaller groups against each other later on. So we have to also look at these tools of social media. Of course, I'm not only referring to youth as, I'm not trying to single out youth in being, let's say, deceived by this, but I'm saying this affects the whole society, and youth being a very important portion of the society. So social media can also prevent you from looking at the bigger picture and only get kind of imprisoned in your own thoughts and within your own group. And this is an issue that maybe it needs another occasion to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. I would ask for a round of applause for all of them. Before officially letting you go, I would kindly like to invite Dr. Gorazd Justinek, Director of Center for European Perspective, to officially close Young BSF 2018.
Thank you very much, Meliha. If I'm right, I have 10 seconds, 5. Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you also from my side to all the moderators of the tables here at the World Cafe. So it was really an interesting debate. Saying that, we are also concluding the couple of days long Young Blitz Strategic Forum, which is growing and growing every year. We are very happy about that. We are not growing only in numbers, but also in the sense of regional participation. So we're getting more and more participants from different countries, which is also very nice. And at least from my side, which is more and more important, also the young participants at the Bled Strategic Forum are also getting more and more importance also at the Bled Strategic Forum, which is taking part in 45 minutes. So quite a lot of you will also have the opportunity to talk or to pose questions at the panels later on and tomorrow. So from my side, it would be again once more a huge thank you to all of the participants, and especially also to our ambassador, our Italian ambassador here in Slovenia, who initiated the idea of this round table, and in order to conclude also this couple of days event. So from my side, I think I was quite short, and please, yes, we have to be relatively fast since we have to start in 45 minutes. So thank you very much for your time and participation. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Goras. For those of you not being so much in a hurry, there's a reception in the venue next door.